you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill 35, the All-Season Resorts Act. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I know it's our first evening session, or my first evening session anyways. Yeah, here all week. So I want to start, Mr. Speaker, by saying that I am, as the MLA for Banff-Kananaskis, obviously supportive of a strong tourism industry and strong tourism development. I strongly believe in the jobs that are provided by the tourism sector across the province, and I see a lot of potential for growth in this sector, and that excites me. People often think tourism is related to low-paying jobs, Mr. Speaker, and often what I say to them is that I'm pretty sure the CEO of Brewster makes a lot more than me. Tourism encompasses all levels of jobs across multiple disciplines. It is a massive economic opportunity. All-season resorts legislation is something the tourism industry has been asking for, and it will provide consistency and predictability for the sector, which is always good. Tourism growth is important, and tourism can provide unique experiences across Alberta to celebrate our beautiful province. I will emphasize, however, that this must be done strategically in collaboration with municipalities, stakeholders, residents, and businesses. And in that vein, I have very big concerns with this bill, the way it is currently drafted. The bill puts far too much power in the Minister of Tourism's office, which I find problematic, Mr. Speaker, because managing public lands is complex and important to be thoughtful in. The minister establishes the principles for the identification of public land designation for all-season resorts as described in the bill. However, it is not clear in the bill who will be consulted, what principles will apply, and who will help define these principles of land that will define an All-Season Resorts Act. So when we read the bill, it is not clear to me where All-Season Resorts Act will apply. Where will these resorts be built in Alberta? What will be the characteristics of those lands? And one thing I think we've learned really heavily in the last couple of years, Mr. Speaker, is that Albertans care a lot about public lands. The Defend Alberta Parks campaign, the response to coal development on the eastern slopes, I think it is safe to say that Albertans are paying attention when it comes to public lands management, and that they have no qualms in sharing their concerns with this government, or with any government, quite loudly. Albertans want to know that developmental activities on Crown land are appropriate and fit within what they envision Crown land being good for. Albertans also want to know that municipalities and municipal districts are directly engaged in that decision-making. And I think the other thing we've seen through the Defend Alberta Parks campaign, for example, is that if people feel that their parks and protected areas are being threatened, they will fight those developments coming forward. And so I'm a little bit concerned that this act needs to, but doesn't ensure that protection of Crown land. And that
Order. Honourable members, I know we've just returned back to the Assembly from dinner. If you'd like to consider continue some of those dinner conversations privately, I encourage you to do so in either of the lounges, the South Member Lounge. There's many places for you to do that. I appreciate that the Honourable Member for Banff-Kananaskis is the only one with the call, though.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would be a real shame if the members opposite missed out on all the genius that I'm spewing forth at the moment. So the other part of this bill that is problematic is that it moves the management of public lands as defined in these all-season resorts into the Minister of Tourism's hands, whoever happens to be the minister in charge of tourism. This has never been done before. Public lands is managed in this case right now by the Minister of Forestry and Parks and the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas. In past cabinets, it's been managed by the Minister of Environment and Parks or sustainable resource development, depending on how far back you want to go. My point, though, Mr. Speaker, is that no minister in charge of tourism has managed public lands. And so the expertise to manage public lands is in the public service under different ministries. And I will say, after being a land use planner myself in the public service, that the management of public lands is incredibly complex and requires expertise. And the reason why this is so complex is because there's a lot of things happening on Crown lands at any given moment. There's large industrial practices like forestry and oil and gas, maybe even coal. There's also communities, grazing leaseholders, and of course, recreation and trails. This complicated land management requires somebody with the expertise to manage it. Moving all-season resorts public lands under the Minister of Tourism, I think, is particularly risky for public lands management. I also get concerned that these public lands will slowly over time become private, without legislatively becoming private, but just in who manages them and how they are managed. And this raises questions around, will Albertans still have access to these public lands once they become an all-seasons resort? I question clauses section 6.3 and 4, which basically says that parks and protected area boundaries under the Provincial Parks Act and the Wilderness Areas, Ecological Reserves and Natural Areas Act, which I will just call WARNA from now on, that section 6.3 says no boundaries will be changed, no protected area boundaries will be changed for an all-season resort, but then section 4 says, well, unless we change the boundaries of parks and protected areas. So it's interesting to me because the process to change the boundaries of parks and protected areas is already defined in the Provincial Parks Act and in WARNA. And so it's weird to me that this clause would even be in this bill at all. I am not clear of the intent behind that, but it does stick out to me as potentially creating a conversation where protected area boundaries can be changed to accommodate an all-season resort. Massively concerning, Mr. Speaker. And as I have mentioned before, Albertans really seem to care about provincial park boundaries and their legislative protections. And if the Minister of Tourism and Sport doesn't believe me or thinks I might be exaggerating, perhaps he'd like to consult his colleague, who was the former Ministry of Environment and Protected Areas, and ask him how people reacted when there was 165 parks on the chopping block. There's also amendments and connections to the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act in this bill, and this is where I find particular challenge, Mr. Speaker. The Environmental Protections and Enhancement Act does a lot of things, but mostly it governs the environmental impact assessment process. This applies to all kinds of developments and land use developments for everything. The regulations associated with EPIA, the Environmental Protections and Enhancement Act, define mandatory activities and exempted activities. Mandatory activities include things like forestry, quarries, dams, coal mining. These are activities that automatically require an environmental impact assessment. From the tourism perspective, facilities or developments that attract more than 250,000 visitors per year and are immediately adjacent to a protected area defined in WARNA automatically trigger an environmental impact assessment. That will still hold true, Mr. Speaker, but my question is about what about the developments that don't meet that incredibly high threshold? So developments that have less than 250,000 visitors a year or are adjacent to a provincial park, not a protected area defined in WARNA, will an impact assessment be triggered for those areas? And the simple answer is that will be up to the Minister of Tourism and Sport. Well, it doesn't really make sense to me because the Minister of Tourism and Sport and the public service working under tourism has no expertise in understanding what the environmental impacts of a particular development may be. As I mentioned before, public lands and environmental impact assessments are managed by the Ministry of Environment and Protected Areas and Forestry and Parks. Yet, these developments could be approved without involvement from those ministries. This is hugely problematic, Mr. Speaker. This act also exempts all-season resorts, regardless of if they trigger an environmental impact assessment or not. It exempts them from going to the Natural Resource Conservation Board, and that is also problematic. The NRCB is the body responsible for public interest reviews of major natural resource projects. Unlike the members opposite, I happen to think that Alberta's landscapes are our greatest natural resource, Mr. Speaker, and requiring all-season resorts to conduct an environmental impact assessment is critical to the success not only of the resort, but to the protection of the beautiful wild lands that people come from across the world to appreciate. There is no other development that is decided by the tourism minister on public lands. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does the minister or the Ministry of the Public Service in Tourism Sport know about the ecological function of these spaces when that expertise exists in other places in the public service? How can we have confidence that our public lands will be protected? Similarly, all-season resorts will not have to follow standard land use planning processes defined in the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, the regional plans that come after them, or underneath them, I guess, sorry, and the cumulative effects associated with that. It seems a little unjust, Mr. Speaker, that all other developments need to consider ALSA, regional plans, and cumulative effects, but all-season resorts do not. And I'll just be clear, Mr. Speaker, all-season resorts will contribute to cumulative effects on Crown lands. That is the nature of cumulative effects. Indigenous consultation is not even mentioned in this bill, and that's also incredibly egregious. I know some of my colleagues will speak to some of the concerns that we have about Indigenous consultation and how this bill may affect access to treaty lands to practice treaty rights. So overall, Mr. Speaker, I love tourism and I love all the jobs that it brings, but we need to do this right. We need to be strategic, and we need to make sure that by planning tourism, we are not damaging the very place that people come to love. Thank you.
Are there others wishing to join in the debate? The honourable member for